also showing promise for the treatment of Alzheimer's. In 1886, in the process of researching a cure for malaria, against which the dye did prove to be effective, German scientist and eventual Nobel laureate Paul Ehrlich discovered that this strange and potent blue liquid would selectively stain the nerve cells of the frogs he dissected, and thus seemed to have an affinity for nerves, the highways and byways of everything we feel and are. Ehrlich, observing how the blue dye sank into and saturated only the frog's nerve cells, leaving the rest of the dissected animal untouched, thought to treat neuralgia with methylene blue. It didn't work, but more than a decade later, in 1899, an Italian physician named Pietro Bodoni, aware of Ehrlich's research, used it to treat manic excitation in psychotic patients with good, even grand, success, calming their fevered fears and rat-a-tat agitations. This makes sense in hindsight, because of all the dyes discovered in the heyday of organic chemistry. It was methylene blue that would eventually be transformed, distilled and finally synthesized, into chloropromazine, otherwise known as thiourazine. 50 years after Bodoni first tried the dye on the deeply distressed of Genoa. Despite the success methylene blue had in calming manic excitation in psychotic patients, the dye never quite had a chance to come into widespread use, thanks to the introduction of barbiturates, in 1904. Just 5 years after Bodoni's initial treatments in Genoa, barbiturates were faster acting and cast a wider net, their highly sedative effects able to calm virtually any kind of patient with any kind of mental illness diagnosis, and to do so more effectively than methylene blue, which was not a sedative. Methylene blue, in addition, could not be used in deep sleep therapy, while the barbiturates could. It is common, or even fashionable, for people to think that prior to thiourazine and the drugs that followed, psychiatrists were operating in the dark ages, using these great and desperate cures in ways often painted as almost, if not outright, barbaric. The real story, however, is much more nuanced. Without doubt, the large asylums of the past could be gruesome places, but the doctors and their proffered treatments must be seen as separate from the settings in which they practiced. In addition to the successes of psychosurgery, with patients such as the physician cum-pilot and the violinist, there are similar stories about patients who underwent insulin coma therapies, electroconvulsive therapies, and sleep